Russian mercenaries abandon their march on Moscow. The Wagner Group's leader orders his troops to return to Ukraine hours after calling for a rebellion against the Russian army.
We haven't shed one drop of blood of our fighters. Now the time has come that the blood might be shed on one of the sides. We're turning back our columns and returning to our field camps.
What does the brief uprising tell us about President Putin's power base? We'll have analysis from around the world. Also tonight, Canadian officials launch an investigation into the Titan submersible disaster and
an innings of firsts.
An Ashes record breaker, how Tammy Beaumont hit new heights for England.
This is ITV News with Paul Brand.
Good evening. Vladimir Putin remains president of Russia tonight, but even his own side has begun to ask for how much longer. Just hours ago, a deal was brokered with mercenaries who'd crossed the border from Ukraine to march on Moscow before agreeing to turn back. The Wagner Group's leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, had called for rebellion against the Russian army. But tonight he announced he's decided not to spill any blood, and the Kremlin says he's been banished to Belarus. So where does all this leave Putin's presidency? From Kyiv, Emma Murphy has been monitoring today's extraordinary events.
To shouts of Wagner, 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 Yevgeny Prigozhin's mercenary army headed back to the battlefields of Ukraine. Quite what they'd sought and what they'd achieved, still unclear. 12 hours earlier, as his men stormed the military base from where Russia controls its war, Prigozhin was dubbed a traitor. Yet tonight, he claimed the moral high ground.
We haven't shed one drop of blood of our fighters. Now the time has come that the blood might be shed on one of the sides. We're turning back our columns and returning to our field camps.
But in this strange day, blood was shed. At least 12 Russian airmen killed when Wagner forces downed their helicopters. With mercenary fighters on Russian streets, President Putin addressed the nation, warning of civil war and punishment for the leaders of the armed mutiny.
This is a blow to Russia, to our people, and our actions to protect the fatherland from such a threat will be tough. All those who deliberately embarked on the path of betrayal, who prepared an armed rebellion, will suffer inevitable punishment, will answer both to the law and to our people.
His words did nothing to stop the Wagner push. Convoys heading straight for the Russian capital, as roads were dug up to stop them. Amid claims of an explosion at the military base, there was chaos on the streets of Rostov. The state broadcaster capturing the scene. Footage from the railway station appeared to show civilians trying to flee the city. And as a Russian helicopter flew above, an explosion hit a fuel depot in the city of Voronezh. Likely an attempt to stop the advancing army from refuelling en route to the capital. Nearby, another helicopter fired off flares as a missile was aimed towards it. After months of dispute with Moscow's military leaders, Prigozhin moved his men from their bases early yesterday, crossing the border into Russia to Rostov-on-Don, where this morning they took control of the headquarters of the Southern Military Command. The military column of hundreds of vehicles then headed north towards Moscow. Prigozhin says that his troops were within 130 miles of the capital when they turned back. As the broken roads were fixed, it emerged the decision to stop was the result of a deal brokered by the president of Belarus. Tonight, Prigozhin left the base he took control of just this morning. Under the deal, he will move to Belarus and Wagner troops will avoid charges. As they leave Russia, President Putin remains in post. But this has been one of the most damaging and potentially weakening days of his 23-year presidency. Emma Murphy, ITV News, Kyiv.
Well, the man behind the mutiny used to be one of President Putin's closest confidants. But in recent months, Yevgeny Prigozhin has become one of the most vocal critics of Russia's tactics in Ukraine. This morning, he questioned the motive behind the war altogether. So who are his Wagner mercenaries and what was it that they wanted? Martha Fairley explains.
Ruthless, brutal, ambitious. Yevgeny Prigozhin's Wagner mercenary group is credited with some of Russia's most significant victories in Ukraine, including the long and bloody battle for Bakhmut. But for years he denied being connected to the shady organisation. Prigozhin served 10 years in prison before starting a hot dog stand, but rapidly gained influence, serving presidents at state dinners and winning military catering contracts, gaining him the nickname Putin's chef. Last September, Prigozhin finally admitted founding the Wagner Group around 2014 in support of pro-Russian separatists in Donbass. It's promoted Russian interests in Syria, Libya and sub-Saharan Africa, where it's accused of committing human rights abuses. Since the war in Ukraine, its numbers have swelled to around 50,000, 80% of whom are drawn from Russian prisons.
The Ministry of Defence in Russia has been supplying Wagner with ammunition and weapons, and Wagner has been working side by side with the Russian army and actually has had very good relations with the Russian army.
But Prigozhin's social media outbursts have been increasingly critical of Russia's Ministry of Defence, angry at a lack of ammunition, blaming it for the deaths of his mercenaries. Today, that friction boiled over into something much more serious. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
Well, we can speak now to our correspondents in Washington and Kyiv. And let's begin with Robert Moore. Robert, today's events have been watched incredibly closely, of course, in the United States. The immediate danger may have passed for Vladimir Putin, but what does it say about his grip on power?
Well, Joe Biden has flown tonight to Camp David, notably alongside his national security advisor. So many questions still swirling about the nature of that deal. Is it really credible for Vladimir Putin to call Prigozhin a traitor and then hours later to offer him safe passage and to rehabilitate his fighters? I was in Moscow for the 1991 coup. We thought that Mikhail Gorbachev had been fatally weakened by the betrayal of his security forces. In fact, he survived for a few weeks, but was fatally weakened indeed, and a few months later was evicted from the Kremlin. A weakened Russian leader rarely survives in Russia. There are such powerful centrifugal forces, so many competing elites, that there is no doubt this has been a deeply humiliating and damaging 24 hours for Vladimir Putin. It may be the beginning of the end of his grip on power. Certainly, it emboldens his enemies both inside and outside of Russia.
All right, Robert, thank you. And now to Emma in Kyiv. Emma, those Wagner mercenaries are returning to their bases in Ukraine this evening, but after an extraordinary day, Russia's forces look more divided than ever.
Well, that's certainly the hope that they have here in Kyiv. They've watched today's developments with as much mystification as everybody else, to be perfectly honest, but they certainly had hope that there was potential for change. That seems to have ebbed away this evening, and there's certainly a more subdued mood here. But they do seem to have made as much advantage as they could with the chaos that's gone on. Certainly we heard this evening that they've made advances in various parts of that front line, and in some areas north of Kherson have actually managed to get across the Dnipro River. So it may be that they have been able to actually try and gain something from this situation, but most definitely there is disappointment that whatever has gone on today in Russia appears to be at an end.
All right, Emma Murphy in Kyiv, thank you very much. Canadian officials have started their investigation into the implosion of the Titan submersible, which killed all 5 people inside the vessel. They boarded the sub's mothership, the Polar Prince, immediately after it arrived back in port this morning and began interviewing the crew. Meanwhile, Canadian police have begun looking into whether a separate criminal investigation is warranted. Sam Holder has the latest.
The flags are at half-mast. This was the ship that launched the Titan. And now back in Canada, where police and safety inspectors have begun their investigation into the dive which claimed the lives of 5 people. The first steps in establishing who was responsible and if any laws were broken.
90% of the time, or even greater, when the RCMP responds to any kind of call for service, we already know that a criminal matter has occurred. Now we're investigating the what, who, why, and where. But in certain instances, we have an event and we don't know if a criminal matter occurred, so we take preliminary investigative steps.
Leaked emails show the CEO of OceanGate, which owns the Titan, was repeatedly warned it wasn't safe.
I've broken some rules to make this.
Stockton Rush, who died on board, had dismissed fears he would kill someone as baseless cries. Rob McCallum was one of those who raised concerns.
You can't dive in a home-built, unclassed vehicle that's had no independent oversight or comment to 4,000 metres and expect to get away with it.
The full safety investigation could take up to 2 years, but police may decide much sooner whether or not there is a criminal case to answer. Sam Holder, ITV News.
Scotland's First Minister has said that next year's general election can be seen as a mandate to demand a second independence referendum. Humza Yousaf said today that if his party wins a majority of Scotland's Westminster seats, it would be enough to demand a new independence vote. And Lewis Capaldi told fans at his Glastonbury set tonight that he needs to take the rest of the year away from performing. It came after he struggled to sing some of his songs as he battled tics caused by his Tourette syndrome. And finally tonight, in sport, it's been a record-breaking day in the Women's Ashes Test match at Trent Bridge.
An innings of firsts.
Tammy Beaumont has made history with the highest ever individual score by an England player. She made a double century, beating the old mark of 189, which was set way back in 1935. Beaumont was eventually last all out for 208, the 5th highest Test score ever. And that's it for this evening. The weather forecast is next. But from all of us here on the Weekend News team, thanks for watching and have a very good evening.
Hello to you again. Feeling hot and humid through the rest of this weekend. Thundery for some in the next 24 hours and a remarkably warm, muggy night ahead. After a perfect summer's evening, temperatures take a while to slide, if much at all. Not much below 19 or 20 degrees for some of us tonight. Notably warm with a muggy, humid air. It will be a stuffy, uncomfortable night's sleep ahead for many. And feeling warm from the word go into the new day. A lot of strong sunshine, temperatures bouncing up quite quickly. And then this rain moves through Northern Ireland and slides into parts of northern and western Britain, some of it heavy and thundery. Hit and miss downpours behind the rain, giving thundery outbreaks now and again. And even with the cloud and the wet weather, feeling hot and humid, in excess of 30 degrees across the south and the east through the afternoon. Further north, further west, a little more comfortable as temperatures freshen up a touch through the afternoon.
Heinz Beans sponsors ITV National Weather.
Whatever the weather, it always feels like home. Vaillant Heat Pumps and Boilers sponsor ITV London Weekend Weather.
Hello there and a very good evening to everybody at home. Well, we've got a big change on the way. Behind me, the Atlantic pressure pattern. Some weather fronts just waiting to sweep their way in, and it's this weather front here that's going to bring that change as we head through Monday, but we're not expecting to see a huge amount of rainfall from it. As we head through the rest of this evening, though, the humidity will continue to climb. A little bit of an uncomfortable night's sleep. Yes, again, temperatures only dropping back to around 16 to 18 degrees Celsius, but there are a few changes as we head through tomorrow. So it is going to be more humid. It's certainly going to be even warmer. Temperatures getting up into the 30s. But it's also going to be breezier as well. And into the afternoon, a little bit of high cloud drifting in from the west. And that's associated with that weather front that's going to bring a change. But a dry day for most of us through Sunday. Very warm though. Temperatures around 31 degrees Celsius. But it's this cloud behind me here that is that weather front. Now we're not seeing a huge amount of rainfall on it, but certainly a big drop in temperature. So as we head into Monday afternoon, we are going to see a good amount of cloud around through Monday, but temperatures dropping back almost 10 degrees Celsius. So around 23 degrees Celsius is the maximum on Monday, and temperatures stay in the low 20s through the rest of the week, but it could be a little bit uncomfortable to sleep through Tuesday night.
Valent Heat Pumps and Boilers sponsor ITV London Weekend Weather.